Welcome to the Afterglow podcast, a space to practice Yoga Nidra informed by the ideas of Carl Jung and internal family systems. Each week we will work on a different life theme, giving us the opportunity to discover vast inner landscapes, sitting with all that life has to offer as we explore who we are. May the afterglow be as bright as the journey is deep.
Hi. Well, I suppose it is obvious that this episode is currently more appropriate for those in the northern regions, although this episode will hopefully stick around a while and can be used by anyone experiencing a winter, a closing off of the outside world, or a feeling of needing to retreat. The Yoga Nidra that will be part 2 for this episode is going to be still, cold, and hopefully help you feel something similar to being suspended in time, allowing forces beneath the surface to move very, very slowly. A lot of my Yoga Nidras include a fair amount of mental gymnastics and spark some kind of introspection or unearth something hopefully mostly pleasant and rewarding. But this is one that will be very still. It will be so still and quiet. I was recently doing research on a different project that I'm working on, and I was reading a book called Arctic Dreams by Barry Lopez. And while doing so, I was listening to a playlist I found of Arctic windstorms. It was wonderful, I have to say. At times I would rest my eyes from reading and just listen to the sounds of the winds and the ice cracking and let my mind go blank. Let it splay out. Stretch across a seemingly endless tundra. As part of my research, I also have been watching a lot of video footage of both the Arctic and the Antarctic. So I have seen some truly awe-inspiring images of what an Arctic tundra looks like in winter. The eerie coldness, the way it's so dark that even in the peak of the day, there is just a weak outline of a cold white light from the sun, looking more like a torch as it lights up the icy katabatic winds. It is something of a miracle that anything survives. In my research, I learned about the Arctic woolly bear moth, found in the northern parts of Canada and in Greenland. These moths spend most of their lives as caterpillars. In fact, they have an unusually long larvae stage of 7 years. Each winter they wriggle into the ground and they stay there and freeze in what is sometimes minus 70 degrees centigrade. And then in spring they thaw out and repeat this process until after 7 winters they pupate and become moths. And they are only moths for the time that it takes for them to mate and allow the next generation to continue. When I read about that a month ago, I realized that right now, in January 2026, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these caterpillars frozen in the earth in the Arctic. Yet they are not dead. They are just as alive as you or I, and they are waiting patiently for the time to come that they can thaw and climb on top of a rock and warm themselves in the considerably more tolerable 15 degrees centigrade of spring or summer. Part of what was so wonderful about reading this book was seeing how a seemingly empty land is so filled with life, but also is constantly changing. Lopez writes about how the light interacts. Whatever the season, there are colors that shift throughout the day, and there are different shapes as the ice moves constantly, and as it moves it casts different shadows, different configurations. And he suggests that these emulate cathedrals, as he describes that they jut heavenward and cast at once both a formidable shadow and also are themselves the subject of great beauty as they capture and reflect the light. The water is also very different depending on recent activity. There is perhaps a current or some movement, and the water can be a dark green. Or if oil has been allowed to collect on the surface, a pink and orange sheen reflects the sky, if you are lucky. In the winter, shadows move across the tundra, a lone male polar bear or a reindeer. Sometimes the ice crystals on the surface look black under the weak sun, yet they're shining. The ordinary gets bent. I think that most of us experience a feeling of restlessness in winter, whether we live in a climate that is snowing or whether we have a more moderate temperature. We sense something of a restriction on us. Friends are less interested in hanging out. Nature takes a little bit more effort to enjoy. And if we haven't been taking our vitamin D3 supplements, it's entirely possible we're feeling overcome with melancholy or depression. I have noticed that for many people this frustration also comes from having to work, as they have to keep regular office hours regardless of the daylight outside, when all they want to do is curl up under a blanket and read. I've had several friends tell me over the last few weeks, all I want to do is hibernate. I don't want to be switched on. I just want to be quiet, not to say anything to anyone. It seems to me that we have an instinct for this when we are experiencing a dip in the weather, however extreme. There is an instinct to retreat, to go within. And yet we're constantly forced to override it because we need to keep our jobs and pay rent. So there is a psychological comparison, of course. Depression. There are types of depression that are the result of brain chemistry and require medication to support. But there is a more universal experience of depression, one that is not scary or shameful, the way that society often makes it out to be. It also shouldn't be medicated, as many people unfortunately do, and they rob themselves of a truly wonderful experience. Because I do believe it is a natural process where a part of us needs to shut down, conserve energy as we process, and in Jungian psychoanalysis, this is essentially considered a gift. I know it doesn't feel like it in the moment, especially because we tend to resist this. We want to always stay up, be fun, energetic, productive, creative. But this is a cycle like any other, and a slowing down, a bend toward the melancholy, is not only healthy, it is entirely necessary for personal growth, for individuation. Jung encouraged his patients to go into the core of their depression and see what wanted to come through that was causing the depression, as a way to pull focus towards this inner core thing. And through this process comes transformation, comes creativity. an opportunity to connect with the self with a capital S. Short of living on the superficial edge of things, when we are called by a depression to go inside and patiently wait for something to emerge, we deepen our experience of ourselves and therefore the reality around us. Hermann Hesse says, "We must become so alone, so utterly alone, that we withdraw into our innermost self. It is a way of bitter suffering, but then our solitude is overcome. We are no longer alone, for we find that our innermost self is the Spirit, that it is God, the indivisible, and suddenly we find ourselves in the midst of the world, yet undisturbed by its multiplicity. For our innermost soul, we know ourselves to be one with all being." Similarly, Rainer Maria Rilke says, "So you mustn't be frightened. If a sadness rises in front of you, larger than any you have ever seen, if an anxiety, like light and cloud shadows, moves over your hands and over everything you do, you must realize that something is happening to you, that life has not forgotten you, that it holds you in its hand, and it will not let you fall. Why do you want to shut out of your life any uneasiness, any misery, any depression, since after all, you don't know what work these conditions are doing inside of you? Why do you want to persecute yourself with the question of where all this is coming from and where it is going, since you know, after all, that you are in the midst of transitions, and you wished for nothing so much as to change?" You may not be experiencing any sort of depression as a result of the colder season, and perhaps you just simply want to enjoy, lean into the isolation, the introspection, the quietening. Returning to our friend Barry Lopez, he writes of the phenomenon of sundogs. I recommend looking up a picture of a sundog if you are unfamiliar with the term. Sundogs are halos, sunlight refractions on ice crystals in the atmosphere on either side of the sun. They look like multiple suns and are also often called mock suns. Most often sundogs are seen on the same line as the sun and can be seen anywhere in the world and at any time, although they are distinctly more noticeable or perhaps even more common in the Arctic. Some are much more distinct, while others require a trick to seeing them. Barry writes, "Once I developed the habit of looking into the empty part of the sky opposite the sun, and at sections of the sky that spanned more than 60 degrees, I began to notice much more in temperate zone skies. The mother-of-pearl iridescence of the sun's or moon's corona in clouds, for example, or noctilucent clouds in the stratosphere late in the evening. The most complex and spectacular display of solar arcs and halos I ever saw was in the winter sky over Los Angeles. At first, out of the corner of my eye, I thought they were only wind-distorted jet contrails. I almost didn't look up." I'd like you to keep this image of the empty sky, of developing the habit of looking into the empty to see what appears. I think that the cold and the quiet of winter, whether literal or not, is an encouragement to do so. Before I end this part 1, I want to suggest listening to recordings of ice cracking, as is common on lakes at the start of winter. As the ice expands, when it freezes, the ice pushes into each other, creating these very, very long cracks that send out this incredibly eerie sound that can travel for miles and miles, but is of course extremely powerful when you're right up close. There is a very good recording by a Swedish artist, Jona Jinton, and I'm definitely going to get the name of the song wrong. The Singing Ice of Storsjön. I will leave a link in the show notes. It is just the sounds of the ice, and quite a remarkably meditative sound that never ceases to make me feel cold, but in a really wonderful way. There is nothing to prep ahead of this week's Yoga Nidra, apart from the optional listening to the ice cracking I just mentioned. Simply make yourself a cozy situation in which to relax and listen to the Yoga Nidra. It is a call to quiet. Enjoy.
Thank you for joining us for this weekly companion episode. It really does add to the experience that you will have in Yoga Nidra. The Yoga Nidra will be uploaded in a few days, giving you time to reflect on the questions that I've asked you. Please subscribe to receive notifications for this new Yoga Nidra episode, as well as for future ones. Thank you for adding your light and kindness to the world, and for doing this important inner work. May the afterglow be as bright as the journey is deep. See you soon.